This is Angel from London, Kentucky, and you're listening to Scandal Water,
where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
and Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, Ashley.
good morning.
I'm a little bummed right now, I'm going to confess.
Why?
Because I intended to come with a prop today for this episode. I'm excited about this episode.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
And I had it in my head that I had a prop that I could use to enhance our little opening here, but it was not there. See, what happened was many years ago when Kennedy was little, when we went to Colonial Williamsburg, we bought her a bonnet.
Oh.
I was going to come in a bonnet.
And you would have looked absolutely precious.
Well, thank you.
Hey, how about I volunteer to show you a different prop?
Oh, yes.
It's not a bonnet, but if you look behind you, there's a little fox. And if you look behind the fox, there is a corn husk doll that I have had since I was itty bitty. My mom made it, and it is precious to me. So it is right in my eye line.
And very appropriate for our episode as well, because we are talking about Little House on the Prairie.
Yes.
Woohoo! This is a big celebratory episode because we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but this is the 50th anniversary. They've been celebrating it all year.
I know. I've gotten tons of Facebook ads about it.
Absolutely. So many events have been going on, and we actually have timed this in a very significant way. Again, more about that in a minute, but first I want to start with something fun. So I'm going to show you something, Ashley. You, of course, will get to see it. Our listeners will get to hear it.
Okay.
But this is just precious. It's a little over a minute long.
Okay.
Action.
I'm sorry, Pop.
Sorry about what, Half-Pint?
Sorry for thinking you didn't care about Jack being drowned.
Didn't care. But I blame myself for not putting Jack in the wagon before we crossed. I should have taken into account how tired he was. I was just full of guilt for thinking he drowned.
But you only said you were sorry we didn't have a good watchdog anymore.
Well, you know, sometimes people say things they don't mean. I just couldn't find the words to say what was in my heart, Half-Pint.
I know.
My goodness.
I love you.
I love you too.
Hey. Do you hear that?
Hear what? Pop.
Stars. Singing hallelujah.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
We'll
they're
stop there.
acting. My goodness.
Here's the thing, Ashley.
Yeah.
You would think that was from the actual production. That was the audition tape.
Stop it.
That was her audition tape as a 9-year-old.
I saw that she had on Oshkosh, and I thought, that seems out of place. But man, that was outstanding.
I could not even. When I found that and I watched it and their chemistry, the emotional connection the two of them formed as she was doing that audition tape, it was unbelievable. Just, I don't know if this matters to you guys, but if you recall, this was from the scene that ends up in their pilot episode, and the situation was that as they were moving across the prairie, their loyal dog Jack they thought drowned. They were crossing the river and suddenly Jack was not there anymore because he had been walking. And when Laura had gotten upset about Jack being gone, her father had just responded with, well, I'm sorry, we don't have a good watchdog anymore. And so this was when she comes out later that night to apologize, and he ends up confessing that he'd only said that because he felt so terrible. And so anyway, it was a really emotional scene, and she went right into it.
Man.
I mean, the way that you would believe, I think, that they are father-daughter, and this was a screen test.
Absolutely.
In a 2011 interview, Melissa was speaking about this, and she said that after they had their audition together, she said that Michael Landon just knew it was her. Here's what she said. I remember clear as anything the two of us doing the scene and him looking at me with tears in his eyes. I choke up just talking about it. I didn't know at the time that it was the beginning of what we would be able to do to each other on camera for all those years. There was some sort of symbiotic connection there. I found out later, many, many years later, that when it came time to take the screen test to the network, he only took mine.
Wow.
Because he knew.
Yeah.
He didn't give them any other choices. He just said, that's Laura.
Wow.
That's Half-Pint.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Okay, so loved that as the opening. You guys can look up that little YouTube video if you want to see it. Just look up Melissa Gilbert's screen test. You'll find it. But again, this year marks the 50th anniversary. The pilot episode, the one that this scene came from, aired on March 30th of 1974. And this show, of course, then got picked up and it ended up running 9 seasons with over 200 episodes and 3 TV movies. And we chose this timing to release this variety episode. This is a variety because this works so well. Although the pilot aired in March, the first episode of the series actually aired on September 11th of 1974. So, of course, we are releasing this on September 10th, one day prior to that, that 50th anniversary
50th
date.
anniversary.
Yes. So excited
Yes.
to do this episode. Tell me a little bit about your background with Little House.
Ooh, well, I knew that we were doing this and I watched it a lot as a kid. I haven't had a chance. We're recording this way earlier in the summer, obviously, and my life is very, very busy right now with theater and I'm in the middle of a show. So haven't had a chance to watch any episodes to renew my memory, but I saw them all. I want to say like all of them when I was a kid. And I just remember being like, okay, it's time to watch Little House on the Prairie and cry. That's your time.
So always emotional.
It was.
Michael Landon, of course, was one of the writers, and I give him a lot of credit. I'm sure a lot of other people were involved as well, but they knew how to touch your heart, not just through the writing, but obviously through the acting as well.
I remember really being irritated by Nellie and her mother and feeling so sorry for the dad.
Nels,
that was his name.
Yes.
I just felt so sorry for him. I wanted him to find a good prairie woman.
he was so sweet.
He was.
So long-suffering.
Yes.
He was a darling.
He was.
Yes. Well, my memory is I also watched it as a kid and loved it. But I think what really made it special to me was I had a teacher who decided that we were going to read one of the Little House books as part of our curriculum. She was incorporating language arts, English language arts with social studies. And so we did like this really deep, in-depth study of one of the books where she would have us doing all these like reading and writing things at the same time that we were talking about this time period in history.
Right.
And
reminds me, I also have all the books. Look right there.
I do too.
Yep.
I don't have it anymore. I had the entire set.
Yep, I've read them.
Still do.
Yep.
Me too. Read them more than once.
Yes, I did.
Speaking of those books, that leads us into the origin story of this long-standing and beloved TV show. All right.
Because it's real.
Well, here you go. So according to a 2023 Woman's World article, obviously the novels were the inspiration behind this entire series. Laura Ingalls Wilder, of course, wrote about her pioneer childhood in the 1870s and 1880s. And this set we're talking about was so popular, it sold more than 60 million copies. It has been translated into more than 30 languages. She actually wrote the first book, Little House in the Big Woods, in 1932. Wow. The 8th and last official Little House book, These Happy Golden Years, was published in 1943, but then they did come out with the first 4 years, which many people consider like the final book now. That did not come out for something like 30 more years almost. That was 1971, and it was actually after her death. She had died at the age of 90 by that point. Now, a little side note is, in recent years, there's been a new, was it an autobiography or biography? I didn't write this down, but there wasn't a new biographical account that came out that shed some light on this. And we now know that Laura's daughter, Rose, was more involved in the writing than people originally thought. And also, there are definitely things, even in the book series, that have been fictionalized. Okay. But so much truth is in there. It's based on a true story. And back in the 1970s, these books were so popular that after the end of Bonanza, NBC executives approached Michael Landon
for
and
a
they
new
said,
starring vehicle.
hey, why don't you make a 2-hour made-for-TV film based on Laura Ingalls Wilder's story? And here's a little quote from Woman's World about this. In the film, the family moves from Wisconsin to Kansas as the big woods where they had been living had become too populated. Here, they begin building a home and meet Mr. Edwards, a man who helps the family settle into their new life. The family navigates a slew of obstacles over this period of time, but ultimately live a content life in their new home. In the end, however, the government makes them leave the native land they settled on, and they move onward to the next place they will call home. It aired in March of 1974 and was a ratings hit. And since it had a sort of cliffhanger ending, the network got thousands of inquiries from viewers asking what happened next.
Yeah.
Thus, the Little House on the Prairie series was born.
And we were all better because of it.
So that gave a nice little overview of the pilot. But I'm going to ask you, Ashley, to read this summary of the series from IMDb.
Sure. A long-running drama based on the Little House book series by Laura Ingalls Wilder follows the lives of the simple, farming Ingalls family: Charles, Caroline, Mary, Laura, Carrie, Grace, and the later adopted Albert, James, and Cassandra, who settle into a quaint little house on the banks of Plum Creek near the small town of Walnut Grove, Minnesota, during the late 1800s. Often narrated by Laura, the series follows her simple farm upbringing from her childhood until her adulthood with Almanzo Wilder, with whom she starts a family of her own. While the series is based on the Little House book series, it's a very loose adaptation, with mostly only key events and elements of fact surviving the transition from book to TV series, the most important being Mary's eventual blindness and Laura's future. I remember that, so sad. Several other fictitious and some factual characters make up the friendly town of Walnut Grove, including teacher Miss Beadle, Dr. Hiram Baker, Reverend Robert Alden, Mr. Hanson of the Hanson Lumber Mill, and the well-to-do Olsons. Yes. Owners of the local mercantile and also the primary rivals of the Ingalls family, except for the Olsen patriarch. Thank you very much. Yes. Family friends include the Edwards, Garveys, and Carters, who in the final season move into the Ingalls little house.
I thought that was a nice little overview. And it kind of covered, I thought, the span of the series.
It encompasses everything.
So a good little review for those of you who've not seen it in a while. And now I am about to touch your heart.
Oh, no. Okay. Again? You already did the opening.
Well, get ready, because I'm telling you, during this 50th anniversary season, the castmates, the people involved with this show, have participated in so many different interviews or special events honoring this. And so I'm about to play a short clip that comes from one of these little anniversary celebrations, and it involves 3 of the castmates.
Ooh. Is Nellie one? She's been doing a lot of interviews.
She has been doing
She's a really nice lady in person. She just played a rotten kid.
So true. Allison Armgren, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I'm a fan.
Now to celebrate the 50th anniversary. Of the series Little House on the Prairie.
That was just a few seconds.
Yes.
But I wanted you to hear the theme song.
Yes.
As sang by the actors who played Laura, Nellie, and Ma.
So cute.
I love that. Because you guys know, because of copyright, we can't play song.
Do it.
We can't play song. I wanted you to hear the theme song, and I thought, what is more precious than hearing them sing the theme song? Because we're going to talk about that theme song.
It also looks like they may have been looking at the field that they ran down.
They were.
I thought
this was one of the anniversary events where they went back to the location where all of that was filmed.
Gosh.
Yes.
I'm not going to make it through this episode.
I'm telling you, this was so much fun. I spent a lot of time on this because I just kept getting caught up in things.
Yeah.
I did. But let's talk about that theme song because it is iconic. As we've already mentioned, prior to his starring as Pa in Little House on the Prairie, Michael Landon was also in a very popular Western, Bonanza, where he played the very popular role of Joe Cartwright.
Little Joe.
Well, Bonanza ended just a year before Little House
No
came
kidding?
out.
It was only a year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the pilot came out like a year later.
Okay.
Michael would, even over the course of Little House, he would often go call back on his Bonanza connections when he would be trying to get a guest spot or just, finding somebody he wanted to ask to work on a certain position, a certain job. He reached back to the man, David Rose, who was not only the composer for Bonanza, but a man who had also written music for a lot of other Westerns, like The High Chaparral, Dundee and the Culhane, several things. He had this big background.
He knows how to write a memorable, because everybody knows the Bonanza one, too.
True. So the thing is, though, David already had something in his back pocket. When he was asked to create the theme for Little House, he actually ends up using a piece of music that he had previously written for one of the later episodes of Bonanza. The episode was Top Hand, and it aired in 1971. That's the thing is, I believe we think, I don't want to make assumptions, but speaking for myself, a lot of times when I think of a composer for a show like Little House, I only think of the theme song.
Yeah.
But no, they are creating music for lots of different scenes within individual episodes. This is an ongoing job. Here he'd already played this piece of music in one episode of Bonanza, but they pulled that out. They made it the theme song for Little House on the Prairie, and it's iconic.
It is.
About that set. You just mentioned it. That was actually the Big Sky Movie Ranch in Simi Valley, California. That's where most of the filming occurred, although obviously they went different places for different things. But it was that 50th anniversary event in March of this past year when when they went back to that location, and it was, very emotional. A little trivia note. Now, I don't know if this is about the Simi Valley place or something else, but I saw on IMDb something that I thought was just fun. So I'm going to share it with you. Here it is, a quote from IMDb. After MGM acquired the show from Paramount, the crew tore up old sets that were used for MGM productions to make room for the new sets that were needed for the show.
Yeah.
When Michael Landon removed flooring from one of the old sets, he uncovered the yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz, which was still intact.
Oh my
Melissa
goodness.
Gilbert and the other kids got extremely excited when they recognized it.
Oh, I wonder if they let them walk down it.
I would hope so. I would think so.
I would have.
Isn't that cute? I don't know. I love that, so I had to throw it in there. And now we're going to talk about the cast.
Okay.
All right. Who were some of your favorite cast members?
I mean, everybody loved Pa.
Of course.
I don't know. I don't remember if this was why, but I remember we called my grandpa when I was younger Pa. P.A. That's what we called him. I loved them all. I don't remember anybody that I disliked other than who I said, which was Nellie and her mom, because they were mean. But I just remember being so endeared to everyone and loving this family and how they communicated and loved each other and could talk to each other and share their feelings. And the dad was so kind. And I mean, did he play the fiddle in the show too? Because he did in the books. I remember
it from the pilot episode.
Okay.
If not later episodes. It was definitely in there at one point.
They were just this sweet, idyllic, ideal family.
Yes.
You know?
So loving. The relationships were just so warm, so caring. Well, we're going to start with Melissa. Okay. She gave an interview with the New York Writers Institute in November of 2022 as part of promoting her book, Back to the Prairie.
I got to read that.
Well, here's something I should say to you guys. If you look up the Little House on the Prairie website, you will find that so many of the castmates have written memoirs.
Have they? Okay.
It is book after book after book. You got all kinds of choices if you are interested.
Okay.
And Melissa has written more than one, by the way. But anyway, she shares a bit about her background, and I'm going to give you just a tiny piece of it because I thought this was so interesting. She was adopted into a showbiz family from the time she was 1 day old. Her father was comedian Paul Gilbert, and her mother was actress and producer Barbara Cowan. And of course, we know her brother played Willie Olson in Little House on the Prairie, and her sister is Sarah Gilbert.
On Roseanne.
She was Darlene on Roseanne, starting when she was only 13 years old in that role.
Wow.
Right. So Melissa Gilbert was doing commercials when she was 2, and as we've already said, she was only 9 years old when she won the part of Laura Ingalls Wilder in Little House on the Prairie. And Melissa has said many times across numerous interviews that she immediately thought of Michael Landon as a father figure. She said she had no idea why her family thought it was such a big deal that she got to work with him because she didn't know him as Little Joe in Bonanza. But she commented, while he clearly has star presence, what she really focused focused on was how warm and engaging he was. So she ends up, of course, starring on the show for 10 years, and her performance did earn her
whole
a
childhood.
Golden Globe nomination.
You know, it reminds me of, in modern times, although it hasn't filmed consistently, Millie Bobby Brown has gone from, age 10 to 20 on Stranger Things. They're filming the final season.
That's true.
Now, they were interrupted because of COVID and filming delays and all that, but she has grown up on that show.
Right.
I mean, that's a modern person that has.
Absolutely. And you think of the Harry Potter cast.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's so many times
Yep.
you feel like you have watched these children develop into adults. Yeah, before your eyes. But she was quoted as saying, "I have to say with 100% conviction that one of the greatest gifts of my life was being cast on Little House on the Prairie. I got to grow up on a set with an incredible cast and crew. Everyone there is like a second family to me."
What a good thing to hear, because there's so many times where we hear about child actors who had a treacherous experience, and to hear that she had a beautiful one is, I feel like maybe that's why when we watched it, we had those feelings of love, because that was what was
that was
permeating.
authentic. That was real.
Yeah.
Well, she did do a few other projects even while she was still on Little House. For example, she was in 2 TV movies, The Miracle Worker in 1979 and The Diary of Anne Frank in 1980. And in 1985, at 21 years old, she became the youngest actress to receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
We still got to do an episode on how to get on that.
And we do, yeah. But anyway, she has had a long career. Just to keep it focused on Little House, I'll make one last comment. She has authored 4 books, including Prairie Tale in 2009, My Prairie Cookbook in 2014, and 2022's Back to the Prairie, A Home Remade, A Life Rediscovered. And she recently co-founded Modern Prairie, a lifestyle company for older women.
Oh,
and
this sounds intriguing.
Well, I started following it because it is so interesting. She literally, for one thing, she sells clothing, and it's reminiscent. It's like flowy and long and kind of prairie looking, but she also, she'll do recipes. She will, I mean.
It sounds kind of like, what is that? What does Chip and Joanna do? The Magnolia stuff? That sounds maybe like she's doing that.
Similar, but
lifestyle, more of a lifestyle.
It is, but it's definitely lifestyle. She's talking about, I don't want to go too far down this path, but she and her husband, Timothy Busfield, they left Hollywood and they are living the farm life.
Nice.
Like, what do you call it? Renovating it themselves. Like, they've done so much of the work themselves. They're planting things and growing things. Nice. It's so she's living this life.
Good for her.
Well, Michael Landon, in this production, everybody, you think of him as that amazing star.
Right.
But he was also writer, director, and producer.
I did not realize writer. I knew director, figured producer, but I did not realize or remember writer.
I mean, you think Little House, it would not be Little House without Michael Landon.
No.
He was just behind every step of it, I think. Here is another little clip from a GMA interview where we hear a bit about him.
He was magnetic. And he drew me in, but he also played with me right away. And our relationship immediately became like parental and in that way. But he treated us when he worked with us like contemporaries, not like kids.
Can I just say I love her little teeth?
I know.
I love her little teeth.
It's so cute.
It is.
But that's the way that she spoke about him.
Yeah.
And the other child stars, we'll come back. We're going to circle back to that point in a minute. They all speak so highly of him. I mean, that I loved what she said about he was a parental figure and he played with us, but he also treated us like professionals. Yes, 100%. So Michael Landon was born Eugene Maurice Horowitz. And
I think I like the name. I like the name.
Yeah, the name change was probably a good idea. But he was already obviously a well-known star when he moved into this. Not only Bonanza, but even shows like I Was a Teenage Werewolf were under his belt. Just quickly, I'll note that after Little House on the Prairie, he was an actor and executive producer on Highway to Heaven for 5 years.
Wasn't that with one of his co-stars?
Yes, the man who played Mr. Edwards, Victor French. Victor French. So they were together, and that show ran actually 1984 to 1989, and it was in April of 1991 that Michael Landon announced he'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Shortly after that, he told Life, quote, "Death's gonna have to do a lot of fighting to get me." And he died just 3 months later on July 1st. He was 54 years old.
Gosh, that's so sad.
It is.
So sad.
So Ma was played by Karen Grassley. She was born in 1942, and she was a successful stage actor before she became Caroline Ingalls. And there's a little bit of controversy here.
Okay.
We're going to come back to this.
Oh, I think I remember reading something about this. About pay?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what did it.
Okay.
She has been quoted as saying, this was actually an interview with People magazine, when I came on the pilot, he was extremely kind and sensitive and a good director and really gave me a chance to find my legs because TV was a new medium for me. But then she goes on to say, so I have to say it started out really, really great. It didn't stay great. And we're gonna dig into this a little bit more because this is one of the controversies.
Okay,
There's just a couple of but the point is when she asked for a pay raise, things did not go so well. We'll talk more about the details later. But the good news is she later reconnected with Michael Landon. They reconciled before he died in 1991, and she said, quote, "Mike and I ended on a positive note, and I was so glad for that."
Good.
A fun fact about Karen is that after leading a theater company in Santa Fe, New Mexico, post Little House on the Prairie, she joined Actors Theater in Louisville, Kentucky in the 90s.
What? We could have seen her.
I did see her.
did?
I got to see Karen Grassley in Shadowlands back in the, I don't know, it might have been the mid-90s. And I remember, I was like, this is Ma Ingalls. I'm watching Ma Ingalls on stage.
lose my mind.
And she was so good. But I got to see
That's
her.
awesome.
I know. I'm so excited about that. Okay. Moving on, though, because this is such a big episode. I'm going to be conscious of our time. Melissa Sue Anderson played Laura's older sister, Mary. She was 11.
Oh, they had two Melissas, Melissa Gilbert and, oh, geez.
And so, actually, I think to distinguish them, I think they often called Melissa Gilbert Half-Pint, and they would call Melissa Sue Gilbert Missy or Melissa Sue, or,
Gotcha.
you know. But she was 11 when the show began. She went on to star in the first 7 seasons, returning for 3 episodes in season 8. And as you will recall, if you watch this show, Mary's character had some tragic stuff happen to her.
Wasn't there a fire?
There was, yes. She actually had to go through the story arc of losing her sight. She went blind in season 4, and she lost her baby in a fire in season 6. And by the way, in 1978, Melissa Sue Anderson became the only member of the show's huge cast ever to be nominated for an Emmy Award.
Wow.
So she did some great work with those tragic storylines.
Yeah.
But sadly, I have seen a few different interviews where Melissa has expressed that she didn't love some of the storylines that she was given as Mary. First of all, she said that when she was very young, it took a while for Michael Landon to trust that she could handle some of the meteor roles. She didn't, like, she felt like a lot of the storylines were kind of going to the other kids, or to Laura in particular. But then, you know, when he saw that she could handle it, she started to get some of those meteor parts or those meteor storylines. But she was quoted in a Woman's World article as saying that after season 4, quote, "I was blind and boring. Either I was just there not doing much or going through some tragedy. I couldn't take it anymore. It became too soap opera-ish."
Yeah,
So
I can see that.
Yeah, she didn't love it. It was also sad to me that something I didn't really realize was that Melissa Sue Anderson never really gelled with the other castmates. Melissa Gilbert wrote in her memoir, quote, "We played sisters and we were only a couple of years apart in age, but from the start, for whatever reason, we never had a real sisterly kinship. She was a strikingly pretty girl, and I wasn't. At least I didn't think so. As we got older, she was the girl everyone wanted to marry, and I was the plucky one they wanted to go fishing with. There was a distance to her, a coldness, though sometimes I wonder if it was just that I never knew how to get her to let me in. She wasn't easy to get along with. I think her reserve came across on screen, and it was certainly apparent off screen, whereas I wore my emotions as if they were neon green t-shirt that glowed in the dark."
So they're basically Anna and Elsa is what they are.
Yeah.
You know, just like beautiful, kind of distant and reserved. And she's the plucky little heroine that you kind of identify with. And I don't know, they just could be personalities.
Yeah. But, I mean, obviously they had a very respectful working relationship. They just never had a really tight friendship.
Yeah.
But on the positive side, Melissa Gilbert actually did have a very close relationship with the actor who played Nellie Olson, Allison Arngrim. They were very tight. Now, in the show, of course, Nellie Olson, you've already said this, she was a bully. She was so spoiled.
Yes.
She was mean and nasty and, you know, just a terrible, which everybody loved. I think everybody loved to hate Nellie Olson.
Yeah, they did.
But in real life,
blonde curls.
in real life, Allison had actually auditioned to play both the roles of Laura and and Mary. She didn't get those, but she earned Nellie. She played Nellie for something like 7 years. And both she and Melissa Gilbert have talked many times about how during the run of the show, they would have sleepovers. They were laughing together. They were joking together all the time. And they still text each other often to this day.
It's reminding me of Pam and Angela from The Office, how Jenna and Angela are best friends in real life, but they were kind of at odds with each other on the show. But it may lend itself to you can just really have fun and dig into your friends, like act like you hate each other.
Yes. And by the way, Allison today is an author, stand-up comic, podcaster, and cooking show host.
Nice.
Yeah.
She's got a full plate.
So her mom, you've mentioned her as well. It was Catherine's nickname Scotty McGregor who played Harriet Olson. She was the Walnut Grove troublemaker and town gossip.
Yes.
Mother to Nellie and Willie. She did pass away back in 2018, but at that time, Melissa Gilbert wrote a little tribute about her that said, "This woman taught me so much about acting, vintage jewelry, life. She was outspoken and hilariously funny, a truly gifted actress as she was able to play a despicable character, but with so much heart. Her Harriet Olson was the woman our fans loved to hate."
Yes.
And then she added, "The thing people outside of our Prairie family didn't know was how loving and nurturing she was with the younger cast."
What a good thing.
I love that comment because I thought it was really cool. I think she represented what I heard to be true about this lovely actress. Different comments, different interviews. People would say that Catherine could sometimes maybe get under Michael Landon's skin or some of the people who were trying to run the show, the directors and such, because she had lots of thoughts about how things should go.
She was opinionated.
She was opinionated, and she would share that.
Here's what I think.
But they all agreed she was just lovely.
Good.
Yes. Richard Bull was the man who played Nels Olson, sweet, long-suffering husband we've already mentioned. And it was Melissa Gilbert's younger brother, Jonathan, who played Willie Olson. This is so interesting.
Yeah.
Jonathan stepped out of the spotlight after Little House ended, and he kind of disappeared. And so it's only through tracking him down, different just brief mentions over the years here and there that you realized he was a stockbroker in New York, for at least for some time. And reportedly, he and Melissa were also a bit estranged. There were years when they didn't talk to each other. However, through these 50th anniversary celebrations, people have asked Melissa about their relationship, and she has said, "Oh, no, we're talking. I spoke to him last night. Everything's great."
Good.
And this got me. Jonathan showed up for one of the 50th anniversary events. He was interviewed on stage with Nellie Olson. He was Willie Olson, so Allison Arngrim was with him on stage representing the siblings, right, on the show. I want you to listen to what he said.
Studied under teachers and masters and wise men. Had a whole spiritual journey for maybe 20 years. I worked in finance on Wall Street.
That rumor is true then. That was one of the rumors.
Yeah. Lived in Manhattan for a long time. But really, at the end of the day, there's nothing better than acting with the Little House cast. Of all the things, that feels most like living. Which was odd because I spent the whole time after Little House trying to figure out how to live. And what I didn't really realize, I suppose, till this week, was that I was already home.
My goodness. They still know how to hit us in the feels, don't they?
Oh my goodness. When I saw that, it got me, and I was like, well, that's going in this episode.
Yes.
Dean Butler was the actor who played Almanzo Wilder back in the day. He has since added writer and producer to his resume, and he also has been very active in the 50th anniversary events. About the show, he told People, "It's an iconic program. Little House is part of people's lives, and it has been for a long time." Now, what I thought was interesting, and Dean is asked about this all the time, and by the way, he also has a new book about his experience in the show that's come out just recently, actually. He's asked all the time about having to portray this new romantic couple because He is significantly older than Melissa Gilbert. Mm-hmm. Oh. Yes, she was only 15 in real life when they were developing in the show. They were developing this relationship. He was an actor in his early 20s. Ooh. And he actually was the man who had to give her her first kiss. So he's asked about this all the time. Here is a brief clip where Melissa and Dean speak about this in a Hallmark Channel clip.
Okay.
In your early 20s, and Melissa, you were just like 15 years old when he gave you your first kiss, or when he proposed to you?
But kind of both. Around the same time.
Was that and I understand this is the first kiss you ever received from...
Character-wise, yeah.
No, ever. From
ever in my
This was the first kiss ever.
Pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you were...
How nervous were you?
Terrified.
Oh, no.
Terrified. Sorry.
But not nearly as nervous as your mother was.
My mom was,
Your mother was pretty
wailing
hysterical,
in the
crying.
background.
Sobbing out loud, which did not help. But now, as an adult, all I can think of is, oh my, poor you.
Yeah.
I mean, what a huge responsibility. I'm, a kid.
Was that your first kiss too?
She was pretty terrific. To be as brave as she was to step into these situations where she had no life experience. Yeah. We've talked about this through the years and how we could have played so many more different kinds of nuance if we'd had a little more life experience. But, we look at it and say, it went pretty well.
Well, I understand you asked Michael if you could hug instead of kiss.
I was scared.
Really?
I didn't know. Well, yeah, like I say all the time, I didn't even shave my legs yet, and you shaved your face. It was weird.
Isn't that interesting to hear the behind the scenes?
It is. And I love how much they can laugh about it and be supportive of each other.
Yes. And I mean, bless their hearts, I'm sure it was really awkward. The interesting thing was it actually mirrored the real life situation because Almanzo was 10 years older than Laura Ingalls Wilder. Now, she was 18 when they married. Yeah. And he was 28. But that age gap was representative of what really happened.
Accurate.
Yeah. I know we've spent quite a bit of time on the cast, so I'm going to move quickly through several other key members. I wish we had more time to do them more justice, but twin sisters Rachel Lindsay and Sydney Greenbush played Carrie Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie. They were credited when you saw it go across the screen, it said Lindsay Sydney Greenbush. Matthew Laberteau first appeared on Little House on the Prairie in 1976, playing a younger Charles Ingalls in flashbacks, but then he later got to join the cast as Albert, the adopted son of Charles and Caroline, which of course was not authentic to the real story that was created through the series.
I didn't remember that, but yeah, you're right.
And fun note was that Matthew's real life brother Patrick was the fella who played Laura's friend Andrew Garvey on the show. Victor French, we've already mentioned, he played Mr. Edwards. He was actually a close, longtime friend of Michael Landon's. They first met when Victor did several guest appearances on Bonanza. And then, as we've already said, after Little House, they went on to star together in Highway to Heaven. Twins Wendy and Brenda Turnbaugh played Baby Grace. Kevin Hagen was Doc Baker, Dabbs Greer played Reverend Alden, and Charlotte Stewart played Miss Beadle. We could go on and on and on, but just because I did not remember this and I thought this was fun, did you remember that Jason Bateman played James, one of the kids that was adopted by the Ingalls?
I did not remember it, but I remember him talking about being on that show.
I did not remember that.
Yes.
Kyle Richards was also on the show. She played the adopted child of Mr. and Mrs. Edwards. Other guest stars over the many years that the show ran included Johnny and June Carter Cash, Melora Hardin from The Office, the one who played Jan, Todd Bridges, Peter Billingsley, Sean Penn, and Ernie Hudson. And finally, Michael Landon would sometimes not just cast people he knew, but sometimes his own children would get small roles or they would serve as extras. For example, Leslie Landon Matthews played various guest roles in the series, including the school teacher Etta Plum in the final 2 seasons. So, that was a lot. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a lot more about the show itself and also address a few of those controversies I've already previewed.
We love including listener voices in our episodes, and we're always looking for more.
So tell us, where do you sip your scandal water? Do you catch up on the tea while folding your laundry, sitting at your work desk, working out at the gym?
Let us know by sending in your shout out, telling us your first name, your hometown, and where you are or what you're doing when you listen to Scandal Water. And you just might hear a voice you recognize starting one of our upcoming episodes.
Email your audio clip to scandalwaterpodcast@gmail.com. The voice memo app on your phone will work just fine.
Cheers!
And we are back. As we've said, the show was very popular, especially in the early years, which would have been basically the 70s. Mm-hmm. It was nominated for numerous awards, and it won several of them, including 4 Primetime Emmys. But as the show went on, it did deviate more
from
and more
from I would think
the
you would
source
have
material.
to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. And it took some criticism for that. It also took a little bit of criticism, probably more than a little, for getting a bit outlandish at times.
Like she said, soap opera-ish?
Yes, yes. Now, what was referred to when you go into your streaming services or you go looking for it, a lot of times they call it season 9, but it sounds as though it's actually kind of more of a spin-off. That was the point where Ma and Pa Ingalls had basically left Walnut Grove, and the story now had turned to focus more on some of the new families, including Laura and Almanzo's family. Mm-hmm. And so after season 9, was when they decided they needed to stop the show. I actually found an archived New York Times article that was published back in 1984 about the finale episode. I always think it's so interesting when you find it when it published
when it was
at that
contemporary.
time. Yes. So here's just part of it. Quote, "The last farewell will be seen tonight. It concludes with perhaps the most apocalyptic valedictory to any television series in history.
What?
The townspeople of the fictional hamlet Walnut Grove decide to blow their town to smithereens."
Oh my goodness.
Do you not remember this?
I don't.
Oh, wait. Okay.
Oh.
And so the entire set that the company had inhabited for the last 10 years was actually dynamited for this finale.
What?
During its first 7 years on the air, Little House on the Prairie consistently scored in the top 10 in the Nielsen ratings. It was one of the rare family shows to continue to hold an audience in prime time.
Yeah.
So the show's creators wanted to provide a memorable ending for its fans. There were a couple of reasons for the fireworks, according to Michael Landon, the star of the show, who also wrote and directed the final episode. 10 years ago, NBC leased a large parcel of land in the Simi Valley, north of Los Angeles, from the Getty Oil Company and the Newhall Land and Development Corporation. Their agreement with the owners was that when they were through with the location, they would restore it to its original state. So when Mr. Landon and the network jointly decided to cancel the show, they knew the elaborate sets would have to be destroyed. It was Mr. Landon's idea.
Might as well film it.
To incorporate that contractual obligation into the story and dismantle the sets on camera. The article goes on to share that the premise behind the finale was that this robber baron had been buying up all the land, and the townspeople decided they were going to blow up their own property rather than let him take it from them. And Michael Landon talked about how carefully they planned the demolition.
Yeah, you can only do it once.
Well, but they had to test things to make sure it was going to be safe beforehand.
Yeah.
He also talked about how these people had inhabited these buildings for so long. It was like this is my home, and it was very emotional but also cathartic to watch it explode. And then the article ends with these words. He, talking about Michael Landon, said he felt that Little House on the Prairie had run its course. Partly because ratings were declining in the last season, and also because Melissa Gilbert, who played his daughter on the series, had grown from a young girl to a woman. Quote, "I didn't think a married woman should still be coming to her father for advice." This is Michael Landon speaking. "But when we started this show, we never imagined it would last this long." I know. So I thought that was interesting. You will hear people talk about how it was a very big kind of over-the-top thing that they blew up the entire town for the finale. People will sometimes reference that. About the controversies, there were 2 things that have come out quite a bit in the anniversary Q&As and some of the interviews that have happened. And also, as I've been reading through different sources, researching for this, 2 different points have come up time and time again. I thought I would address them.
All right.
Okay. So the first one, I got to hear the castmates actually talking about this. Apparently, they had one of their anniversary events on June 15th, and they had this little panel set up. And one of the points that came out was they were reflecting on the wild culture that so many TV sets during the 1970s had in common.
Are you saying wild as in behavior or wild as in nature?
Well, one of the things they talked about was that there was smoking and drinking on the set.
Oh.
In fact, Karen Grasley said she and Michael both smoked, and they would often do it right there on the set. You know, they'd finish a scene and they'd be over there smoking with the kids all around them. And so then other people started chiming in. You know, Allison Armgrim, Nellie Olson again, she was quick to say nobody thought that was strange.
Yeah.
That was just normal back
that
then.
Was normal.
Yeah, things that might seem scandalous today were just
regular. That's the way everybody was living at that time at home anyway.
Another example then that came out was how common it was for the cast and crew to drink behind the scenes. And especially if they were having some kind of a celebratory event, like a Christmas party or a wrap party, or even when the filming was done for that day.
Yeah.
Now, Karen Grasley noted that when the kids were on the set, quote, there wasn't cursing. There was a real respect for the fact that we had children all around us, and I was really glad about that. And then also about the drinking point, she said, I must say that from my point of view, it was after 4 o'clock when the kids went home that there was a much looser atmosphere on the set. And I thought this was nice. Matthew Laberteau, who played Albert Ingalls, he was quick to jump in here. He agreed. He said that he felt like the children on Little House were treated much better on that particular set than on other films or TV shows that he'd been part of.
Yeah.
He said, quote, they were protective. They were caring and nurturing. They catered to young actors to give them a safe place to do their best. And then Allison Armgrim, who actually advocates for an organization called the National Association to Protect Children. She was also very firmly in that same camp. She said, quote, you've seen so much press now about some of the terrible, terrible things that have gone on sets. I always said on Little House, if someone had actually bothered me or the girls and the crew found out, you wouldn't find the body. That was the atmosphere that I was given there, that we were very protected to some degree. That was really good to hear, that the kids felt like they were honored and valued and protected on that set. And the last quote I'll share is actually from Melissa Gilbert about her experience. She said, there was a lot of tactile affection, hugging, embracing, and snuggling that made people feel good, close, and loved. I've never been tossed into the air so much. It was all part of the bonding that took place as we became a family.
I love it.
I think that that's one of those things that you notice as you look back over time, that, you know, norms change. What's acceptable changes.
When you know better, you do better.
Exactly.
They just didn't know better back then. That's not an excuse or like, oh, well, you're making excuses for them. That's just what they thought.
And they thought it was okay. I mean, I actually...
Doesn't mean it was. They just thought it was.
Well, then let's jump into the second controversial thing. This one really disappointed me, and you probably know all about it, but I had not heard this. It relates to Michael Landon's reputation.
Yeah. The other side.
Yes, I think my perception of him is only what I've known of him as an actor. He is Pa Ingalls to me.
Right.
And I think people who watched him in Bonanza also see him as Little Joe.
Yeah.
I did not watch Highway to Heaven. Probably people see him on that.
Yeah.
You know, he was an angel on that. So I think
his public reputation is pretty much like handsome leading man, kind, gentle father, literal angel.
Right. I mean, wisdom, values, love, nurturing. That is who you see, you know, squeaky clean. Squeaky clean image. But in more recent years, some stories have emerged that have painted him in a very different light, especially some of those stories shared by Karen Grasley, which we've already alluded to. And I think it's caused some disillusionment for people. But let's talk about a few of the things that Karen has shared from her perspective. In her 2021 memoir entitled Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, Reflections on Life, Loss, and Love from Little House's Ma.
That's a really nice title.
It was, Well, she apparently shares a lot of very personal things about her life. In fact, one of the things that she delves into, according to what I saw, was her own battle with alcoholism, which was influenced by her father's battle with alcoholism. And so she goes into a lot of detail about that. But one of the things that she does address is this tension between Michael Landon and herself, and how, according to her perspective and what she shared, he treated her very disrespectfully on set. You guys will remember that earlier I shared a brief quote from her where she talked about how he was so kind to her on the pilot and was wonderful to her, even gave her a break, letting her find her legs because TV was new to her. Right. And she said, quote, "I have to say it started out really, really great. It didn't stay great."
Yeah.
Well, what she said happened was at the end of season 1, the show, of course, was incredibly successful. So she asked for a raise.
And you don't do that.
No. And I mean, of course, he was making so much more than she was, but he was also doing a lot more. Yeah. And so she said Michael did not like it. And he kept equivocating. He started trying to meet with her privately and convince her she shouldn't be asking for this. He was basically trying to persuade her to let it go, and she wouldn't let it go. And she got her raise.
Oh, good for her.
Well, except that
made him mad.
After she got the raise, she said her character was featured in fewer scenes.
And that happened after season 1?
Yeah, so from season 2 on. And she said that Michael Landon became, she used the word moody around her. And then she said that what was even worse was that he would be crude sometimes, especially when they were doing those scenes. It was a thing on Little House where a lot of times Ma and Pa would have their most vulnerable, their most personal conversations when they were laying in bed at night. The kids had already gone to sleep and they would catch up on everything. And so it was during those scenes a lot of times when she said it was just not good. Here's a quote. "I loved playing those scenes where we would talk over whatever the town crisis was and kind of flirt with each other. They were really sweet scenes. But he began to tell filthy jokes while we were sitting there in that bed, and I had nowhere to go. I was trapped in that little bed in that little room with men standing all around, and there was light just on us. It was so humiliating." And she gave more details.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would be language. But basically,
he was trying to put her in her place.
I think so. However, as we said, the positive note was, even from Karen, she said they reconnected but prior to his death, and said that they did end on a positive note, and she was so glad for that. And on the flip side, some other castmates came in with some different viewpoints trying to defend him. Shannon Doherty sadly passed away just very recently of breast cancer. Do you remember she was on Little House?
I think I do remember that. Was she one of the daughters?
No, actually she played Jenny Wilder from 1982 to 1983. And on her podcast just this past May, she spoke about her experience on the show, and she specifically mentioned Michael and how he influenced her. This is what she said. "It's kind of amazing because when I think about the long span of my career, but also how rough some jobs were and unenjoyable to be a part of, a little bit toxic, it was really the experience on Little House that spurred that passion for being an actor. And it was having a mentor like Michael Landon. And I don't care what anybody else's experience was like. I know the truth about that man, and he was just unbelievable." She went on to say that he was so talented, so kind, so considerate, and it really helped shape me. And he was incredibly caring for my entire family. And several of the other young castmates, in particular, it was always the young ones, said the same thing. They have spoken publicly about how amazing he was to them.
Right.
So their experience was different, very different than what Karen
experienced. It sounds like
experienced.
The children's experience was different than at least one adult's experience.
Right. And by the way, I don't think we've said this yet, Melissa Gilbert named a son after him. She has a son, Michael.
Oh.
Yeah.
Armchair psychologist.
Which brings us to our armchair.
Okay.
I thought I would play something, one last little clip. This is also from Melissa, and then we could react to it.
Okay.
In one of her interviews, she talked about why Little House was so special and why she thinks it has endured. And I'm going to cut it down just a little bit. So let me just tell you that before the part you're about to hear, she was talking about how at the time period when this show came out, it was a time of upheaval. It was the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
They had drug issues they were dealing with. There was the recent Vietnam War, the oil crisis, struggles with the ERA and civil rights. So lots of things going on at the time period when this show was coming out. And then here's what she said.
You know, a lot of people coming home from Vietnam, a lot of men coming home addicted to heroin and other drugs, and all that sort of fun disco stuff just kind of, you know, it was going to start slowing down. And Michael Landon was telling those stories through the Little House lens. There was an episode called, I think it's called A Soldier Comes Home, A Soldier's Return, where Mrs. Whipple, the sewing lady's son, comes home from the Civil War addicted to morphine. and overdoses and dies at the end. We did that on Little House on the Prairie, but because it wasn't done in a brash or exploitive manner, it was, I think, more impactful and more palatable and more realistic. We told stories of racism, of chauvinism, anti-Semitism. Oh, we covered all the isms. The complete and utter disregard for the Native American people. And Michael really shined a light on a lot of those issues.
So what did you think about that, Ashley?
I thought that was really interesting that they could address modern problems through the lens of the past, because it's still the same problems. It's just it's the same problem, just wearing different clothes. So I like how they were able to address that. One thing that I remember, I'm gonna misquote this, but something that you guys know, I love the History Chicks, and one thing that Beckett talked about, Beckett Graham, one of the hosts, is that Laura Ingalls Wilder was one of the first people that introduced Beckett to the concept of history. And I think it was in her original books, thinking that my present right now is someday going to be somebody's past.
Yes.
And that it just as a little kid, she was like, oh, I'm a little kid now, but someday this is going to be the past for somebody. And even though it's in the past, the same problems are still continuing, and we can still address them and talk about them.
Right, which is, again, why I cut her off before she got to her ending statement, which was, and this is why she thinks it is so enduring. And your point feeds right into that. It's the same problems. And also, Michael Landon and the other people who worked with him on this and writing it or creating this, they made it so personal. Like, not only are you looking at problems that are still relevant to you today, but they've put you in these shoes. You are so empathetic to what these characters, like, you feel like he understands what you're going through if you are the person experiencing this problem. You started the episode talking about how often it made you cry. It really did always touch your emotions, but it was also, I don't know, I feel like it was also uplifting. Like, you almost always ended feeling like things are going to be okay, or there is hope, or there is a way to address this problem, or there's, keep going.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. You feel like you're encouraged to press on. Whatever you may be dealing with, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And I think before we end it, I don't want to leave the conversation with what we talked about with Michael and just sort of act like we're dismissive of that. I think it's very possible and probable, I don't know, we don't know him personally, that he was both of those things.
Right.
I think he was wonderful to the children from what they're saying, and I think their experience with him was absolutely true to them. Like, one thing, the Shannon Doherty quote she said, I don't care what other people say, I know the truth. I don't always like the term my truth, because as a believer, I think there is only the truth. But in this case, I think there is Shannon's version of events and the kid actors' versions of events was true to them. And I really think we ought to not discount what Karen went through.
Right.
Because that was really horrible. And that was not a good thing for him to do. And I hope that part of their reconciliation was him realizing that he was unkind to her and not her having to apologize. I hope there was some offer of, please forgive me, from him too. But knowing all of that, if he was those things, again, we were not there. This is all secondhand for us. It still doesn't negate the gift that he gave us through this show, I'm
so glad you wrapped back to that, because I think you make such an excellent point. And I introduced it by saying a lot of us see him with that identity of being almost perfect.
Right.
And the reality is, like everybody else, he was a flawed person. We all have our flaws. Like you said, he apparently was just wonderful to those children, but there was this experience with Karen that was...
This is going to be from my own memory banks. I am not positive he had a positive relationship with his own children or some of his own children. So again, I could be totally wrong about that, but there seems to have been another side to him.
Right.
As there is to most people.
Right. And which goes back to the point we've made time and time again, who we portray and pretend to be on stage or in a TV show or in a film, that is not necessarily who we are. We're responsible for, our own lives as we go through our day to day. But the other thing that's kind of a little interesting is if you really delve into the Little House on the Prairie books, Pa comes across as the perfect father there, but in reality, he was flawed too.
Sure.
There were several things that come out if you dig into
the real
Pa, where he struggled with things. He didn't always make the right decision. There were times he was in debt or he made the wrong choice, and he was not, I think, the idealized perfect man that he appears to be to a reader of that book series.
Or to a writer of a young girl writing about her beloved father.
True.
Well, no matter what, everything we have said in the last 5-10 minutes still doesn't negate the fact that this was a fantastic show, touched so many people, brought history to life, identified us with the past, and told stories that moved us as a human being. So
Absolutely.
Well done, Michael Landon. Good for you.
100%. And I'm so excited that, like everyone else, because that's the thing, so many fans have come out for these 50th anniversary celebrations. I am so glad that we get to also honor all of the people who were involved with this lasting, enduring, beloved show. So cheers to you.
Everybody, put on your overalls and your prairie dresses.
And your bonnets.
And celebrate the show.
Cheers to you.
Cheers.
If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown,
that's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.